Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey watching Married at First Sight. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, if you need a therapist, don't use YouTube. Get a therapist. You deserve it. Let's see if anything of interest comes out of my face.
And find a way to be truly vulnerable with one another.
I'll sit over here.
Okay. Because their success in both of these areas will have a major impact in whether they decide to stay married or get a divorce.
So, hallelujah. I have been waiting for this moment the entire season for the doctoral level marriage and family therapist to sit down with all of the couples, but this is the first time this has happened as far as I can tell, and actually have a couples therapy session. Now, a lot of these experts, the three experts on the show, when they sit down with the couples, it's usually not actual therapy. It's usually essentially trying to force them together. There's just like encouraging them to be together. So it's not therapy. Couples therapy isn't trying to force people together and against their will, if you will. But this therapist, who is the only therapist of the experts, has often, I think, really listened more instead of more forcefully talking to people. So let's see how this session goes.
Thanks for having me over.
Yeah.
I think that it's awesome that the two of you have really started navigating some of these longer term issues. Intimacy, physical, emotional, those are all like the glue that makes a long-term marriage last. And opening up about your past is usually a great place to start. So maybe talk about things that have happened in your families. So if there are things that you don't want to mimic in your marriage, those would be the things to share.
Again, hallelujah. This is a perfect question that you would ask someone in couples therapy in this situation. This is a pretty common thing to ask couples is, let's talk about your past. And I would love it if this therapist would ask all the couples on this show and all the couples on all these reality TV shows this exact question. Let's look at your childhoods, because you'll often hear me talk about how and speculate these people's childhoods. That's where their personality forms, not only what they're attracted to some extent, but also their defense mechanisms, their ways of coping with threat. Their sense of threat is almost always formed early in life. Certainly you can have negative events or positive events throughout your life that can be a part of your defense mechanisms, pros or cons, but a lot of our issues come from when we're little. And our efforts to protect ourselves from the hurts and the pains and the fears of our childhood often will shoot us in the foot when we're trying to be in a marriage. So this is a great question. And this couple, they're often pretty differentiated. Katie's actually a therapist, so I'm guessing this is going to go pretty well. Let's watch.
I think for me, as a kid, I did feel like I had to forfeit opportunities to do some of the things I wanted to do in order to do other things that needed to be done. And I guess I ended up maturing a little quicker, but I also always hold on to the child at heart inside of me.
Okay, so that's interesting. I have been watching this couple up until this point, but I haven't shown all the clips. And I don't think I showed the clip where the two of them actually had a pretty big fight, in which Derek was talking about he has dreams that he's always wanted to fulfill. I don't know what those dreams were exactly, but he says he has a lot of dreams that he wants to pursue that don't necessarily align with marriage and family. And Katie was very upset about that. For Katie, she was very upset and seemingly very threatened by the fact that Derek had a lot of dreams that he wanted to pursue on his own. And Derek was very firm about it. It's like, I have my dreams and I'm not going to let anyone get in between me and my dreams. He was careful to say that falling in love is his number one priority and raising kids is his second priority. But after that, he has all these dreams. Now, for Katie, I was speculating that as she was getting extremely angry at him for having these dreams and very seemingly very hurt, she, I'm guessing, it was this idea that he has dreams was threatening to her because she perceived it as, if he's going to have dreams, then that's going to pull him away from me and I'm going to be alone. And right now, I already kind of feel alone and hurt because he hasn't fallen in love with me yet. My husband is not in love with me. We have a great relationship. We get along really well. but he has stated he's not in love with me yet. And that makes me really sad. But instead of talking about that and expressing that, which can be very, very difficult because it's a horrible thing to realize and to fight about, because what are you going to fight about? You must love me. So it's an intractable situation. Instead, it gets displaced to this other idea of you have too many dreams and you need to grow up. And she was saying these things to him. So this is great that they're bringing up the issues that are informing that fight, which is for Derek, he's saying he had to grow up fast when he was young. I'm guessing it was either alcoholism, divorce, maybe he had to take care of younger siblings, maybe someone died in the family, maybe there was other things that impacted the family, or all the above that necessitated him foregoing his childhood. But as he went into adulthood, he said, now that I have the freedom of adulthood, I'm going to actually go back in time and indulge myself with my own space, taking my own goals and really pursuing them, even if some of them are a little frivolous, because I was denied that when I was young. So I'll be darned if I'm going to forego that as an adult now that I have the power to do so. So he's explaining that. Now, hopefully, they'll be able to talk about this in a way that helps them to see that they both can have what they want. Katie can have security, and he can have his dreams. And maybe Katie deserves some dreams here. Let's continue watching.
Because I never want to let it go, because I felt like I never really had that full experience. So for me, I always am kind of dreaming about a lot of stuff.
I think that's where we're really, I went this way and he went that way, is he's always held on to it, like the child in his heart. Like he's always held on to it very tightly. And I let that go a long time ago. I was like, gotta move on, gotta do this, gotta do that, I've been like the caretaker in my family, made sure everybody was okay.
All right, very interesting. So Katie's a therapist. She seems very self-aware. So does Derek, by the way. And for her, she is talking about how she went the other direction. And that is a common scenario for people, is when you're denied your childhood, and some of you can relate to this. Some of you out there can very much say that you were denied your childhood growing up. Alcoholism, drug addiction, divorce, conflict, domestic violence, abuse, and other kinds of things, but those are the common ones. And as a child, you just can't really be a child if you're going to survive, or if your family's going to survive. And sometimes this means actually getting a job at the age of 10 so that you can help the family pay the bills. But more commonly, it has to do with emotional childishness, meaning that, and childishness in a good way, right? Meaning that 10-year-olds are not supposed to worry about their parents. 10-year-olds are not supposed to worry about their family putting food on the table. 10-year-olds aren't supposed to worry about their younger siblings getting to school safely. That's another factor that can play in, is if you have a lot of violence in your neighborhood. And so when you're emotionally having to think about things that are things that a 45-year-old should worry about, it pushes out 10-year-old appropriate thoughts like, dopey-dopey-do, I want to have fun, and I'm going to think about myself, and I'm going to do this thing in the backyard, and I'm going to not have to worry about those things, and I'm going to watch this anime TV show because I don't have anything else to do. That's what a 10-year-old should be worrying about. They shouldn't be worried about their parents in this way. Now, sometimes this isn't the parents' fault. Sometimes it's a result of war or famine, or being a refugee, or there's some things that parents, just by the nature of the society, or racism, sexism, classism, can also impact a family and cause children to have to grow up really fast. So sometimes it's not the parents' fault. It often is the parents' fault, but it's usually because the parents, when they were children, they were also denied their childhood in some way, or they're, abused in some way. And so it's just a transgenerational thing. Gets passed down from one generation to the next. And so Katie is saying, for Derek, he held on to his childhood. For me, I went the other direction. I just let it go. And one of the things that I see in people like Katie is they will be very responsible. They will be very dependable, but they will often be very critical of people who have irresponsibility, maybe overly critical. They will also sometimes even be critical of their own kids when their kids are acting like kids, because the Katies of the world had to grow up very fast. And one, they might not have a good gauge of what a 10-year-old should be responsible for, or they actually secretly to themselves subconsciously resent other people for having childish ideas or childish freedom. And so Katie might actually be very critical of Derek because he represents what she had to sacrifice for her family. She talked about in this earlier episode about how her parents got divorced, and that was kind of hard on her. And so I'm guessing at least that was part of the issue for Katie, was that she had to grow up and maybe even take care of her parents, or, who knows what was going on there. Now, I'll also say that a lot of therapists have this past. I don't have this past. I wasn't parentified when I was growing up. But a lot of therapists do, and it kind of makes sense, right? If you were the responsible one who took care of everyone came to you, and you got self-esteem and skills on how to help other people, and you kind of consider yourself the helper, then that lends itself to a therapist job. This is why a lot of women actually are attracted to the therapy. The therapy professions, mental health professions, are dominated by women. Well, it's because families tend to, if there's a problem in a family, the daughters in the family are usually identified as the helpers, and the boys in the family are not. The boys in the family are often identified for other roles. And that just has to do with our social construction of how we see girls and women and how we see boys and men. And so a lot of women end up becoming therapists because it's not the only reason, of course. There's a lot of other reasons. But I have seen this because I've been training therapists for over 20 years. And one of the classes that I've been teaching since my very first class that I ever taught, in the class that I've been teaching pretty much my 23 years as a professor, is what we call family of origin systems. And this class is designed to have therapists learn theory and learn how to help people, but also use that theory to investigate their own family of origin. And so the therapist, and I'm guessing Katie has been through some of that training, who knows, because she's a therapist. And in this class, we have therapists learn theory, but they also will investigate their grandparents' personalities and how that affected the way they parented their children, which is the parents. And then you look at the parents, the therapist's parents, and you analyze them as they were growing up and how their personalities formed in relation to their grandparents. And then they analyze how they themselves, because their grandparents had a personality, that affected their parents' personality, which affects the therapist's personality. This is very important for therapists to investigate extensively throughout their career. The class that I teach is just a momentary part of that whole overall lifetime journey. Therapists have to be aware of their own issues and heal from their own issues. Why? Because if we don't, we are at risk of harming our clients, or at the very least, being unaware of what's happening because we will have blind spots and biases and that kind of thing. And so it's very important that therapists are as self-aware and healed and continue to, because there's never a point where it's like, okay, I have graduated, I'm completely self-aware and I'm completely healed from my past. No one is like that. So therapists have to always be looking at that and always be working on that. Some therapists really dedicate themselves to that, and some therapists don't. So anyway, so as I would assign these papers in this class for students to write, one of the things that I learned over 23 years of teaching the class is that there are a lot of therapists who were parentified, meaning they had to forego their childhood early in life due to a lot of different issues. And they got self-esteem, and their role, like Katie was saying, their role in the family was to take care of other people. But so there's pros and cons to that. Like I said, the pro is that you're very helpful, and you're very caring, and you're very responsible. But the con to that is you're denied your childhood, which you deserve. And so maybe in this session, they can get to helping both of them balance that out.
And worked through all the crisis that we would have. And so I had to let go of that. I know that I've had to grow up a little bit faster because of some of the things that I've faced in my life. My parents got divorced when I was 10, and things were really bad. When my parents were fighting, I would be the one to stay there and make sure they weren't hurting each other. And so my inner child didn't really ever get to grow or develop.
Right, exactly. So that was my speculation, and it seems as though Katie has that conceptualization as well, that due to divorce, and it's not just the divorce, it was probably years of conflict building up to that. And then as the family goes through the divorce, a lot of parents, even though they're being told not to, and even though they know better not to, they will often put at least one child in the middle and communicate through that child, or at the very least just make that child extremely aware of the conflict that is going on in the parents. I've worked with a lot of clients on this, not only families, but individuals who are going through divorce. Perfectly, good-natured, moral people will end up dragging their kids through a divorce. And I will point it out to them, okay, you're involving your kids too much in this divorce. You need to be venting to other people. Your kid needs to know some things, but not as much as you are revealing to that child. Now, sometimes it gets hard because if, say, I'm working with an individual client and I don't have access to their ex. Their ex isn't my client, and my client is telling me, well, my ex is dragging my kid into it and talking all this crap about me. I feel like I need to defend myself. It's very complicated. But generally speaking, you want to take the high road, not only because it's just moral, but also to help your kids. And it gets complicated. But the point is that for Katie, she probably had years of conflict prior to the divorce, and then the divorce happens. So she was probably denied her childhood, not at the point of divorce, which sounds like it was 10, but maybe even beginning at the age of 5 or something, that she was denied her childhood, which is a trauma for her. You often will hear me talk about relational traumas. That's a relational trauma. It's not only just being denied your childhood, which is horrible in and of itself, but it's also this notion when you're 7, 10, 12 years old that you don't deserve your childhood. Your parents aren't giving you your childhood. And what do I mean by giving you your childhood? Well, it'd be things like being allowed to not think about your parents' marriage. 10-year-olds deserve not to have to worry about their parents' marriage. 10-year-olds deserve to just play after school and not have to worry about what's going to happen, what visitation is going to happen, what the lawyers are saying, what the courts are going to say. 10-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about their parents' egos. A lot of parents going through divorces will be very solicitous of their children. You like me better than the other parent, right? I'm your favorite parent, right? Kids pick up on that, and kids are like, wait, so my parents' self-esteem is based on my approval of them? 10-year-olds should not have to worry about that. They should be able to be 10, be 12, be 7 without having to worry about those kinds of things. And I'm guessing that Katie really did have to worry about that, which is which she had to sacrifice for herself. So it's not only just being denied your childhood, but it's also this notion of I don't matter enough for my parents to allow me to just be a kid. I have needs of just wanting to be free and not have to worry about that, but they don't care about my needs, and they're imposing this thing on me, and therefore I must not matter to them. I must not be important in their minds, in their hearts, because my needs are not being met. That's another very horrible lesson that children will learn. So it's not just that I'm being denied my childhood, it's that I'm being treated as though I don't matter, therefore I must not matter. When you treat kids like they don't matter, they don't say, well, that's their problem. No, even teenagers, they will say, oh, I must not matter. That's my conclusion. I don't matter. And many of you out there might be able to relate to this notion of, I just don't matter. And you retain that throughout your life. You can be 65 years old and still basically at your foundation of your schemas of believing that, yeah, I just don't matter. And it's just the tragedy of mistreatment growing up. The tragedy of relational traumas is that the effects last a lifetime unless you become self-aware and heal through various different ways, including therapy. So I'm guessing that for Katie, as she starts to tear up a little bit, that it's not just intellectual to her. She's not just saying, I was denying my childhood, I had to grow up. I was the one who took care of other people. I'm guessing for her, this is really a chance for her to let out her emotions of pain, of being treated like she was worthless, like she was ignored and denied things. So let's continue watching.
When you think about that child, is she still around?
I don't know. I feel like it never really got to like develop. That's sad. I don't like that. Yeah, no, I don't feel like, because I don't look back and like remember a whole lot of those dreams really ever.
Okay, so kudos to Katie for going there for her own benefit, for her marital benefit, and for us as watchers. She's modeling for all of us how to be vulnerable and how to be healthy. So to point out, and I'm so glad this is happening, and the therapist being great. I've been waiting for this moment this whole season, for this therapist to shine as a marriage and family therapist, just like me. And what we're looking at, there's a lot of different ways of conceptualizing what's happening right now. Because a lot of people are like, what is therapy, or what am I supposed to do in therapy? Well, this is a very important mechanism of therapy, a very important action of therapy. For Katie, she walks around probably in a constant hyper vigilant state of being responsible and not childish, because her family depended on that. And she is in a constant state of denying her own childhood, denying her own needs, maybe a lot of times. And being a therapist doesn't help, right? Because you're all day taking care of other people and denying your own needs, because you can't ask your clients to take care of you, right? So she is walking around that constant state, just speculating from extrapolating for what she's been saying. Well, right now, what is happening is the therapist is the one listening and taking care, and Katie is the one, falling apart, if you will, not, destructively, but letting out and allowing herself to be vulnerable and allowing herself to be emotional, allowing herself to have someone take care of her needs, allowing herself to be maybe a 10-year-old child, letting out those 10-year-old emotions of denial and hurt and pain. And right now that's happening. And through that experience, if you repeat that enough times, which I'm guessing Katie has been through experiences like this in the past, through her own training, through her own therapy, that eventually you feel like you matter. Because right now the therapist is experientially, not just saying, hey, Katie, you matter. The therapist is showing Katie through emotional action that Katie matters. And Katie internalizes that. And that's what when I say healing, that's healing. You have to experience a corrective experience. You have to experience what your needs need. You need someone to take care of you because you weren't taken care of when you were 7, 10, 12 years old. The therapist is now taking care of me. Now I can start to grow up. Now I can start to be less distrustful of other people. Now I can start being less resentful of Derek for having a childhood because I'm being allowed my childhood at the age of 30 or however old Katie is. So that's another wonderful thing that is happening right here. Let's continue watching.
So I think it just didn't really get to develop.
Katie's inner child is not as present as it is for me, but it makes sense on why she reacted the way she did with me being a dreamer.
So this is great. He is now learning more about her. In the fight that they had, which I didn't show, they were looking like they might divorce over it. I mean, it was pretty intense, the fight that they had. He had his dreams and she was like, grow up, you need to not have your dreams. And now he is looking at her as she's crying and being tended to by the therapist. He's learning so much. He's not a part of this conversation. Therapist and wife talking, and he's watching. And he is saying, oh, I now know about an issue of my wife's that I've never known before. And I never would have known if I didn't show up for this session. Couples therapy allows for so many moments like that. As I'm talking to one of the spouses, the other spouse is intently paying attention. And almost all the time, the spouse that's not talking will say something like, I had no idea about that. Why didn't you tell me about that? Why? Because when we're treated badly growing up, we have a really hard time being vulnerable with our spouse. it's another tragedy. The more we're treated badly, the more we don't let people in so that they can help us heal. And it takes a trained therapist who knows how to provide that space and that attachment and that safety to actually help people to not be defended and actually be vulnerable and to heal. So he's exhibiting that. He's like, whoa. And that insight really, really helps, because Derek could have walked away from that fight in the past saying, like, my wife is a terrible human being. She just wants to deny me my dreams. And she's just an unfair, irrational, weird person. Instead, he's like, oh, now I see why she was doing that. I don't like that she was trying to take away my dreams, but I understand why. It wasn't vicious. It's because she has relational traumas. This is me advocating for couples therapy, because a lot of times people will say, because right now you could argue that it's sort of an individual session, right? The therapist is talking with the wife, and they're not really involving the husband at all. And as a marriage and family therapist, I often hear, even in my own field, other people saying, well, you can't do individual therapy and couple therapy. That's inappropriate. That word just drives me nuts, because I'm like, what do you mean by inappropriate? It's just because it's uncustomary or you're not used to it. As a couple and family therapist, as a relational therapist, I want to bring people in. And even when there's abuse happening, like domestic violence, it's not always indicated, for safety reasons, but sometimes it can be very helpful for me to talk with the victim in front of the perpetrator, for me to talk with the perpetrator in front of the victim. There's a lot of really good things that can happen from that. It's not always indicated, but I'm just using that as an extreme example. So this is me advocating for relational therapy, for marriage and family therapy, because we are a minority. You people who aren't in mental health, you probably don't know this. This therapist and me, we are a very small corner of the mental health field. And even in our corner, there are people who are kind of influenced by the outside mental health world and by society to think more individualistic about clients, instead of retaining our systemic and theoretical foundation of relationships and helping people to bond and not being afraid to bring in multiple people. As a family therapist, I've had sessions with 15 people. I would have to have rows of people, in a sort of auditorium style session. And for 3 hours, we're going around and around. I mean, just imagine for yourself. Now I'm just ranting about marriage and family therapy, but just imagine for yourself, if you could get your family, whatever you consider to be your family, your kids, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, whoever it is that you consider to be, in need of a therapist to help you out. Imagine if you could get those 5, 10, 15 people in a room once a week for 2 hours with a trained marriage and family therapist. Imagine all the good that could come from that. There are so many stuck points in families and resentments and missed potentials in families. And as a marriage and family therapist, I have been able to do that, as I'm sure this marriage and family therapist has as well. It's a wonderful thing to see. And that's why I love marriage and family therapy, is because when I'm talking to an individual, which can be glorious in its own ways, they leave my office, they live their lives in their relationships, and then they come in next week and they report to me what happened. Like, I had a great time with my husband. And I hear about it, and I'll celebrate that. It's another thing for me to see it in my office, to see two people fall in love again, to see a family let go of a resentment and understand each other better, to see a family heal from the death of one of the children in the family. And I'm not just talking with one person, I'm talking to everyone. And I'm turning people towards each other. I don't have to provide that healing. I can engineer the healing between the individuals in their real lives, which I just find to just be possibly the best moments of my entire life, honestly. Those moments are, in the top 3 sort of categories of everything I've ever done in my life. I can die knowing that I did those things, or I helped facilitate those moments. The clients had to do all the work. I just facilitated it. But it's just tremendously important to me and meaningful to me. So what's the call to action? Well, get a marriage and family therapist if you need one. If you're wanting to enter the field, consider marriage and family therapy. And if you want to vote for politicians that fund marriage and family therapy, do that too. All right, let's get back to the show.
We each came from divorced families, and that forced us to grow up fast, but we reacted in different ways. I clung on to my inner child in dreams while she shut out her inner child entirely. So I think some of these days I'm gonna have to take her like to Dave and Buster's or a bunch of little random stuff, go on Easter egg hunts, and to open up the dreamer side of her. Would you like any assistance when there's any moments or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I missed the chance like for it to develop when I was younger, but I could work on it now.
That's great. So they're collaborating against the problem. They're on the same team against an outside problem instead of having it be, seeing each other as the problem. You're too childish. You're not letting me have my dreams. Instead, they're saying, hey, we both were denied our childhoods growing up. Let's both attack that and solve that problem together because we love each other and we're on the same team. That shows that this couple was raised well enough to be able to trust you, or they've done enough personal work, or they make the sort of choices to do that sort of thing. But it also says that the therapist set up that space for them to have this conversation.
I'm just letting you know that if you ever want to, I'm here to help you with it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That warms my heart. Ultimately, it's about bonding. Ultimately, it's about the two of you feeling like you know who your partner is.
Right. So the therapist says, that warms my heart. And I believe her that as she's watching, she's like, oh, that really warms my heart. As a therapist myself, some of the most emotional moments that I've had as a therapist is when I'm talking to couples and families. When I see them do that, what they just did, it warms my heart. And then I start to cry. A cry of, tears of joy or lamenting the pain of all of us that informs that moment. I don't really exactly know where those tears come from, but it's, I guess you could call it tears of joy. But it also feels kind of sad in the moment as well, of like, we have to do these things because we have hurt in the past. That's why we're here, because I feel the pain that you went through to have to get to this moment of glory and connection. And I'm sort of grieving the pain that they both felt into that moment, and grieving my own pain that I can relate to with what they're talking about. And so those will be the moments when I cry. Every therapist, every good therapist, I will say, has their crying triggers. Some therapists will cry when they hear about horrific child abuse growing up because they can relate to it, and so on. So I feel like every therapist has their own thing. Some therapists cry at the drop of a hat, and a lot of trainee therapists, novice therapists that I'm training, will be very worried that they're going to cry. They'll come to me and I'll be like, Kirk, I cry easily. What am I going to do? And I say, just cry. It's probably rational and normal, one, to cry. Two, what's wrong with crying? Three, you're modeling how to be crying. So many clients don't feel like they can cry. Clients will sit on my couch and start crying, and they'll apologize to me, which I find to just be not evidence of something wrong with them, but there is something wrong with our society when we're teaching people that they can't even cry in therapy. They'll be crying, be like, oh, okay, I'm sorry for crying. And I'm like, who taught you that you can't cry, one, and that you can't cry in therapy? You could, if you just sat on my couch and cried for an hour and didn't even talk, I would consider that to be worthwhile. So go for it. If you have to cry, do it by all means. And I say, if I have to cry, I'm going to cry too. I'm not going to hold back, and I'm not going to apologize. So it's this weird thing. You'll see people who are even pretty enlightened apologize for crying. I'll admit that if I'm in a movie theater, because I cry very easily with movies, Toy Story, this kind of thing, and I will be crying in the theater and I'll be hoping that no one sees me. Why? Because I've been shamed by society and life that crying is shameful or stupid or feminine or childish, or I don't even know it. It's bizarre. When you are watching a comedy and you laugh out loud, that's okay for the most part. Some people are shamed for that too. But that's a physical, involuntary, emotional expression that happens when you think something is funny. Well, when you're sad or you're happy sad and you start to tear up, it's an involuntary physical manifestation of your emotions. Why are tears so shameful? Why do some men have trouble crying at all because they've been shamed their whole life, that they've essentially shut down their connection with their own sadness and their own vulnerability and their own tears? A big part of what I do with men actually is getting in connection with that crying. Anyway, so that's just me ranting about crying, but the therapist says, it warms my heart, and it would have warmed mine too if I was in the room, and I might have even teared up a little bit.
And sharing those things can really help you to do that and make you feel like it's possible that love could be around the corner.
All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me. If you haven't subscribed, that would be cool. But if you don't want to, then don't. I'm not going to force anyone, but you might make me cry if you don't subscribe. Comment below, what do you think? What do you think about crying? Let's talk about that. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself. Cry when you want to, and allow other people to cry, because we all deserve it.